Hey there, fifth grade families. Mrs. Bowers here. Before I get into our math support for this week's homework, I do want to reiterate the new directions for the weekly reading homework. So, from the beginning of the school year to this point, every week your child's reading homework has been just keeping a reading log. So, identifying the title of the book that they're reading at home, as well as the total time spent reading and the number of pages read as well. I would like to add in a second layer to this reading homework. It was really nice to see a lot of families show up for your conferences last week, and I kind of heard like similar sentiments shared from family members that their goal for their child is to really improve their reading and their reading comprehension. And this is one major thing that you guys can do at home to really improve and really meet those goals that you have for your children. So I would like to encourage our fifth graders to read for 30 to 60 minutes every night. 30 minutes really should be the minimum. Science has proven, research has proven that reading every day really helps improve comprehension and fluency in your child's reading. So, really trying to encourage your child, hey, like, let's get a book and let's read. If you do need books at home, your child goes to the library once a week and checks out library books. Those are great books that they can read at home. Any books that they have in their book bins at school, they can ask their teacher to bring them home and just return them the next day. So if you are ever in any need of books for reading, just have your child either get books at the library every week or take them home from the class as long as they return them. So in addition to the regular reading log, I've added on another layer because I think it's really important for kids to practice at home the skills that they're learning in school. So you'll notice on the back side of your child's reading log, there are some boxes and some directions. I already explained this to all the fifth graders today, but just to reiterate, your writing about reading is becoming a part of your homework every week now. So I'm not looking for you or asking of you to do writing every single night, unless of course you're the kind of parent who wants to push your child to do that, then do that. But just kind of starting off slowly. Here are their choices. So if they're at home and they're reading a fiction book, meaning like a graphic novel, they're reading a chapter book or a picture book, this is a fictional type of text. And in fiction, we read about characters. So your child's job is on the left-hand side of this chart. I want them to grow an idea about a character that they're reading by identifying a character trait and then providing evidence from the story that supports that character trait. So, for example, if they're reading a story about Dogman, Dogman is a popular graphic novel series. They could say, Dogman is a brave character. They would write in the character trait box, Dogman is very brave. Great. Now, using the two bullets underneath, I need two textual details from that text that show or support the reason why Dogman is a brave character. On the flip side, if your child is at home reading nonfiction, that means any books that teach information, biographies, anything that's teaching some kind of factual, real event or thing, okay? This is nonfiction. Their job is to identify a main idea and details from the text to support that main idea. So if you're reading a text about Rosa Parks, a main idea would be that Rosa Parks was a determined and resilient woman. I know that she is determined and resilient for these two reasons, and then identify two pieces of evidence or textual details or evidence to support your main idea. So, I'm not looking for one writing assignment for every night. Just encourage your child, hey, why don't you write about your reading tonight? Or if your child is a procrastinator like myself, they might wait until Thursday night to write about their reading. So this is kind of like the segue that I'm trying to get them into. I'm trying to encourage them to write about their reading more in school and outside of school. Okay. Without any further ado, let's get into this week's math homework. So I have decided to move our math test from this week to next week. My decision is solely because Wednesday is an early release day, so I don't get a chance to see all 45 of my fifth graders. And as well as Thursday, we have a field trip to RPI. So, again, that's another day. I won't be seeing all 45 of my students. So, I thought it would be more fair to kind of make up those days and push the test back, just giving us a few more days of practice before we have our math test next Thursday, which will be the 14th of December. Right? Is that right? Look at my calendar. The 14th. Yeah, so next Thursday, December 14th, will be your child's math test. Their math test will be covering adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. This week's homework is I'm asking your child to subtract mixed numbers. And I'm going to walk you through two examples. I'm going to show you two different ways or two different strategies that your child can use to come up with a final answer. All right, so let me dive right on in here. All right, so number one, I don't know if this is the first page or the second page of math homework. This might be page 2 of math homework. So the directions say subtract and show your work. So I guess I'll just treat this like this was a math class, okay? So our problem is 15 and 2/3 minus 6 and 3/4. I know I can't start subtracting yet because my units are not the same. Units being the denominators, which is in this case 3 and 4. So I have taught your fifth grade student that before they can I'm just gonna get rid of my face really quick. Before they can start subtracting, they have to make like units. They have to find a common denominator. And parents, some of the lingo I'm going to use might sound familiar to you from when you were a student as well. So what I want to do is I'm going to want to find the least common multiple, or the LCM, of my denominators. The reason why I want to make like units is because it would be like adding apples and oranges. The sizes or the portions are not the same. I have to make them the same so that I can subtract, add, compare these numbers. So, how I do this is I list the multiples of each denominator until I find a denominator or a multiple that they have in common. The multiple that these have in common are 12. Now, are there other common multiples of 3 and 4? Yes, absolutely. But we want to find the least common multiple. So once we find our least common multiple, that now becomes our new denominator or the common denominator. So when I rewrite these mixed numbers, I'm going to rewrite these mixed numbers with the denominator of 12 because that is my common denominator, my LCM, my least common multiple. This next step, we're going to make equivalent fractions. Now, families, just so you know, this process of finding an LCM and making equivalent fractions, your child has been practicing this for 3 weeks now. So if they're still having a hard time with this process, my suggestion is really encouraging them to get on reflex, practice your multiplication facts, and practice skip counting. All right, so I want to make equivalent fractions. So what's happening inside of my head is I'm asking myself, how did I get from thirds to twelfths? Well, I multiplied by 4. My rule is whatever you do to your denominator, you must do to your numerator in order to make an equivalent fraction. So if 3 times 4 is 12, what's 2 times 4? 8. So my equivalent fraction is 8/12. 2/3 is equivalent to 8/12. Next, we'll do the same thing for 6 3/4. I'm going to want to ask myself, how did I get from 4 to 12? I multiplied by 3. Whatever you do to your denominator, you must do to your numerator. So 3 times 3 is 9. We now have equivalent fractions. Now we can work on subtracting. All right. So up until this point, this is all review. Your child has been making equivalent fractions for a few weeks. Now here's where the new learning gets involved. When we subtract mixed numbers, you can subtract your whole numbers first, and then you'll subtract your fractions. But here's the issue. If I have 8/12, I cannot subtract 9/12. There's not enough twelfths to subtract. So I've taught your child two different ways that you can subtract. There's an arrow method where your child will count up, which really hones in on their strength of addition, or regrouping. A lot of fifth graders have actually told me that they prefer regrouping, which I think is interesting because I think the arrow method is easier, in my opinion, but I'm also a 34-year-old adult. But if your child is thinking that regrouping is easier, then that's the route that we'll take. So when we regroup, I want to rename 15 and 8/12 as an improper fraction. That way I can take away 9/12. So watch what I do, listen to my process. Practice makes permanent with this. So at first it might seem very foreign, like, what are you talking about, lady? But I promise it will make sense. So think of this as like we are borrowing, right? Let's say if you were to do, I'm just going to make up a random number. Let's say that you're doing 31 minus 19. You know you can't do 1 minus 1, so you have to regroup and borrow a 10 from the tens place. It's the similar concept here, but with fractions. So when I take 1 away from 15, I'm left with 14. The one whole that I borrowed, I'm going to rewrite it as a fraction. So instead of saying 1 and 8/12 are left over, I'm going to write that 12/12 and 8/12 are left over. What we're doing here, families, is we're making an improper fraction. That way, your child is able to subtract the subtrahend, which is 6 and 9/12, aka the number they're asked to subtract. So what I'll do is I'm going to put this whole kit and caboodle together. So we have 14 is my whole number. I'll then add 12/12 plus 8/12, which is 20/12. I made an improper fraction, and now I can subtract easily 14 minus 6, and then 20/12 minus 9/12, which, if you're keeping track here, we have 14 minus 6. 14 minus 6 is 8. And then 20/12 minus 9/12 is 11/12. And there's our final answer. Now, as I like to say to my fifth graders, practice makes permanent. So let's practice and try number 2 together. This time I will move a little faster. I would say the most challenging part for fifth graders is having to regroup. But everything else leading up to this is review from the past few weeks. For example, all right, I have 18 and 1/2 minus 4 and 3/5. I cannot subtract 3/5 from 1/2 yet because the denominators or the units are not the same. I need to make them the same by finding the LCM, which stands for the least common multiple, because I want to make equivalent fractions that share the same denominator. When I list the multiples of 2 and 5, the first multiple they have in common is 10. So when I rewrite my fractions, I want to make sure that my LCM is now my denominator. I would say 98% of fifth graders can at least get through this stage. They know how to skip count. They can use multiplication charts. They can use a list. My hope is that most of my fifth graders, at least from what I've seen in class, they can do this step in their head. They know the multiples so well from third grade. If your child is still in need of having to write a list for multiples, then that might be a sign that we need to get onto Reflex more often, which is our math app that really hammers multiplication and division facts. Okay, moving on. I now need to make equivalent fractions. I went from halves to tenths. I'll ask myself, what did I multiply by 2 to equal 10? That's times 5. Whatever you do to your denominator, you have to do to your numerator. So what is 1 times 5? 5. Okay. Next, move on to our next fraction. I went from fifths to tenths. I multiplied by 2. Whatever you do to your denominator, do to your numerator. 3 times 2 is 6. I would say for the most part, 85% of fifth graders can make equivalent fractions. So for the most part, most of our fifth graders are up to speed and can catch up to this point. All right, now here comes the new learning, subtracting mixed numbers. What you might notice here is I can do 18 minus 4, but I'll have a really hard time subtracting 6 tenths from 5 tenths. So this tells me that we must regroup. So I will regroup 18 and 5 tenths. When I take 1 away from 18, I'm left with 17. The 1 whole then is given to my fraction. But because we're still going to be in that position of subtracting 6 tenths, I'm going to rewrite my 1 whole as 10 tenths. So I'll put all of this together. This is read as 17 and 15 tenths. Now I can subtract my subtrahend. We'll subtract the whole numbers first. 17 minus 4 is 13. Subtract our fractions. 15 tenths minus 6 tenths is 9 tenths. There's our final answer. All right, so as your child continues to try the rest of the problems on their own, remind them, first find the LCM, then make equivalent fractions. Before you subtract, you might have to regroup. Alrighty, and that's my help for this week's homework. Best of luck, and please don't forget, homework is due on Fridays. All right, talk to you guys soon. Bye.